Yeah, okay, that's a great question. And I'm glad you brought it up because it is the big elephant in the room. Like I've definitely heard this question a lot lately. And so I would say that yes, absolutely, Agile is still relevant today. And I would say that it's because uncertainty, complexity, customer expectations, the need to learn very, very quickly, all of those things have not disappeared. In fact, it's even more important now. So I agree that some practices in like the theater, or you called it the Agile Titans, maybe some of that's associated with Agile might need to change. But I do think that the enduring principles like adaptability, feedback, customer value, learning, empowered teams, all those things are super important. And those enduring principles definitely are still valid and still relevant today.
Hi, this is your PM Cowboy coming back with podcast number, is it 54 or 55? We have to check on that one. I think it's 54. And we're still going to work on the title. I think the title we have here is Can Elephants Dance? Evaluating Legitimacy of Enterprise Agility. It's been a while since we've done something on agility, and it seems like AI is robbing the energy, the capital, and the oxygen for any other topic. Maybe transformation comes in there a little bit, but that's a kind of a topic that we can interweave with agility here as well. I had the pleasure recently of being introduced to somebody else from PMI. I'm a big advocate for PMI, so we're always glad to have powerful advocates for different topics at PMI come on board. And I was introduced to Denise Jarvie, Denise Jarvie, and Denise will then, so what's your formal title, Denise?
What's my formal title?
Yeah.
Managing Director of Agile. And you can say Managing Director of Agile Alliance and the Agile Lead at PMI.
Exactly. I'm still sometimes stuck on this product owner title, but that's a much more appropriate title for what you do, Denise. Anyways, I was introduced to Denise and we did an introduction round. And I said, Agile, it's been a while since we've talked about it. And we had a sensational pre-talk. I hope the podcast lives up to the pre-talk. She's incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly sympathetic, and we're glad to have you on board, Denise.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here today and to have this discussion with you.
And you have a wonderful backdrop, if I may say so.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Denise, we start off all our podcasts with an introduction round where we allow our guests to kind of tell us a little bit about what makes them tick. Kind of what we call the passion journey, right? So long before you were working for PMI, you had a history. I think most of our job and personal histories from education and from different jobs is eclectic. But it's the sum of that eclectic mix that I think makes the quality of every major advocate for a topic. So I'm going to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what educational background you have, and how did you end up with PMI?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So again, thanks for having me. I'm Denise Jarvie, and I came into Agile almost from the opposite direction, actually. I started in the Army, the United States Army. And after that, I worked in a defense company, like Northrop Grumman was the first job I had after the Army. And I was working in a project controls environment where I learned all kinds of things like earned value management and compliance and planning. So basically like very rigorous project management. And fast forward several years later, I joined an organization which was actually going through an Agile transformation. And so I moved from Scrum Master to coach to Agile project management leader and eventually to enterprise transformation. So I've actually spent a lot of my career reconciling these two worlds that are kind of, sometimes presented as opposites. So predictive and adaptive and control and empowerment, project management, Agile. I actually think organizations need both stability and adaptability, and that the skill is really knowing, where each belongs. So I think my background has really led me to this place in a really perfect time where I can think about and persuade the, organizations we work with to be adaptable and also still have that stability that's required.
Well, I would agree with you. I don't have the same extensive military background, but I have exposure to the military complex a little bit from way back in the day. And I would agree with you. I think that a U.S. military or any military background is a profound training place for some of the most essential and foundational concepts of modern management when it comes to organizations, right? We always talk about the matrix organization. I always explain matrix organizations as being an example that a organization has a split personality. But I also say it alludes, and you were kind of alluding to this as well. The concept of stability and predictability versus the need for agility. It's a golden paradox that I don't think most companies understand and embrace enough, right? Could you give us some concrete examples? If a lot of people who traditionally think of military would say, classical pyramid, chain of command. Sometimes, even there's an archaic system of traditions that are still upheld, which a lot of companies would say, "Oh my God." The old principle. I used to say, if you want to explain the difference between military corporations and projects, I would say when you're in the military, you walk into your squad or your company and you say jump, and the first response theoretically is how high, sir or ma'am, right? Then you go in the corporate world and you walk in with a cup of coffee and you say jump, and your employees say why, where, how, right? Third example is you walk into your project team and you say jump, and they say who the hell are you? And I think that's kind of the bandwidth that we have to navigate. Tell us a little bit about your military experience and how it's shaped this range of understanding that's so essential to modern organizations, where stability and governance and framework is so important, versus to still have the ability to take a step back and say, hey, this is a case where we need to be agile. What were some of the distinct things that you learned in the military that helped you with that understanding?
Sure. Yeah. So I was a military intelligence officer in the Army, and some of the things that the military taught me are that scale requires discipline, and it also requires shared language, kind of clear roles, and an understanding of intent. I think that's really important. And I think it also taught me that no plan survives unchanged. Like, once reality happens, things change, and we all know that. And so
I think General Patton said everybody has a plan until the first bullet is shot.
Yes, exactly. That's true. So people need to really understand the mission, the constraints, and the boundaries within which they can act. And that does not mean that there's no control. Like, there's definitely control. It's actually a more sophisticated form of control, I think. So the goal is not commanding every single action, but clarity of intent at all the different levels is super important.
So would you say that the military is still a good source to learn the balancing of a matrix organization?
Yeah, I think so, because it faces the challenges every day at this huge scale. Like, the Army is huge. And so they're always thinking about ways to put new technologies, maybe new organizational structures or ways of operating into active units. So basically soldiers can accomplish the mission, but also experiment and learn while remaining operationally ready. So yeah, I think that the matrix challenge is real. You have to maintain discipline, you have to have accountability, and really in the military, of course, chain of command. But you also have to enable kind of local adaptation and experimentation depending on what happens in your mission. But I really do think that shared purpose, clear intent, and having those boundaries is what really allows people to execute and still have the same goal or mission.
Are you familiar? I don't know if it's a term that you guys still use. Are you familiar with the term tax lanes?
Tax lanes? Yeah, we do that all the time. Yes, absolutely. So
simulated uncertainty exercises where you're kind of asked to think on your feet.
We have to do that all the time. Like, even to pass your officer candidate school or run your mission, you have to practice this all the time. So yeah, we use TAF lanes. Usually it's with field exercises where we're like leading troops and we have to figure out things along the way. So yeah, definitely familiar.
I've been on a couple FTXs myself, and I had the opportunity to go through a couple tax lanes, and they left really an incredible impact on me so far that I often say a lot of corporations would benefit if people were put into similar situations. And we had very dramatic situations, like, I don't know, being ambushed by a sniper or an officer coming along and wanting to take away your POW to shoot him in the head. I mean, it was like really dramatic for a young individual who's like, I've never been exposed to this situation. I have no idea what to do, and you're looking left and right. These are dramatic situations, and I think for a corporate scenario, you probably need the context. You need a little bit more civil ones. But I thought it was a great example of how the military can at the same time embrace tradition and discipline and commando bay, while at the same time empowering every member of the organization, kind of in the swarm logic concept, to understand when it must take personal responsibility and autonomy. And I find that this training ground is often missing in corporations. Do you think that the military is a good source to learn management and leadership? And does it translate into the private economy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't be the person I am today, nor the leader I am today, if I didn't have the military experience. So absolutely, a lot of great qualities, certainly accountability for yourself, making the right decision, being honest, learning as much as you can, and translating that
principle-based leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, 100% agree. My son is actually in the military right now, and I think that he's learning to be a fantastic leader. Like, I'm so excited that he's getting that experience. So yes, military experience is wonderful and definitely translates into good leadership.
Well, thank you for your service.
Or it can.
I picked up a little tidbit when I picked up my dog, so I'm full of hair. Sorry about that. When we were had our introduction talk, you'd mentioned a little tidbit of information that stuck with me. You addressed my pseudonym, the PM Cowboy, and you pointed out that your husband is actually a cowboy, not like me, a wannabe. I think you said he was from Wyoming.
He is, yeah. My husband Doug grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, so definitely like true cowboy. I definitely was not until I met him. And what I would say about Doug is that, yeah, he and his family grew up, what I'll say, with the code of the West. So there's all kinds of different principles that they kind of live by. Things like live it each day with courage, or do what has to be done. Talk less and say more. So I feel like there's a lot of really good principles in the cowboy culture that also relate to leadership, just like military and leadership.
I couldn't let that pass by because I think a lot of people find my pseudonym amusing and entertaining, but I think it doesn't always translate from culture to culture. I think most cultures admire cowboys, but they have kind of this image that we're unwashed, uncouth, shoot first, ask questions later. And I have this book up here from a business consultant from Texas who talks about cowboy ethics in the corporate world. I think it does require some in-depth understanding of the true cowboy culture, and you've mentioned some of those principles that are so powerful that I think do make a big difference and help you in being a good manager and a great leader. So I couldn't let that pass by.
Yeah, I love it. I definitely noticed that you called to me. It spoke to me a little bit when you said you were the cowboy PM, just because of that connection with Doug and his family in Wyoming. And I think that really cowboys understand something that maybe organizations really struggle with, which is, you can adapt to changing conditions, but without compromising your values and your commitments and your purpose. That's
but you have deep values, and it's not about carrying them in front of you and making a big fuss of them. It's kind of about the subtlety. I saw an Instagram reel yesterday. I follow some hardcore cowboys in Texas. Some of these real old timers that were cowboys back in the 40s, and when you listen to them, it's like poetry. And he said, we used to work for little money, and we work long hours, and there was never an issue of competition. It was never an issue of showmanship. It was just, show up, do the work, value the work, and live for what you do. And those were some of the things that resonated with me. And also said, I often feel that project managers are the overseen or underappreciated cast of exceptional leaders and managers in organizations. So that's why the PM Cowboy resonates. And the other thing is, this is also part of the cowboy culture. We don't pick a fight, but we'll end one. So we're not afraid of some conflict. And my experience is that every good project needs conflict management. It doesn't always mean you need to punch somebody in the face, God forbid. But the willingness to interact with people and stand your ground sometimes, I think, is another principle.
Yeah, you do what has to be done, and you do it carefully, and you're focused on what really matters. I think all those things definitely apply. So yeah, I love the connection for sure.
Yeah, well, give my regards to Dick. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. It's been a while since we talked about Agile, and I've just done a bunch of podcasts on AI, and there's a whole bunch of people who are hyping AI. There's some people who are talking about its decline, its potential decline, or blowing up, or whatever else. And Agile has been a topic that has been in the forefront of corporate discussion for several decades now. It didn't receive quite the same exaggerated hype that AI did, which I think was healthy for it. I think it grew gradually, and I think it had a great name once it stopped calling itself Crystal and Scrum and all those less pretty names, and called itself Agile. It kind of created that that wildfire of excitement because it was a visceral feeling instead of a word. But I remember even a couple years back, listening to one of the big icons of Agile, proclaiming the soon demise of Agile, and I was like, "What are you talking about? Most of us are just catching on. Can you hold your breath for a second?" But he was thinking in a typical Agile Titan way. I think Agile Titans, as soon as something becomes too mainstream, it turns them off, and they want to turn its back. But my question to you is where does Agile stand right now from your perspective in the corporate world? Now, I'm going to ask a question, and it's not meant to be a negative question, but maybe a harsh question. Okay. Is it relevant today? And if so, why and how?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up because it is the big elephant in the room. Like, I've definitely heard this question a lot lately, and so I would say that yes, absolutely, Agile is still relevant today, and I would say that it's because uncertainty, complexity, customer expectations, the need to learn very, very quickly, all of those things have not disappeared. In fact, it's even more important now. So I agree that some practices in like the theater, or you called it the Agile Titans, maybe some of that's associated with Agile might need to change. But I do think that the enduring principles like adaptability, feedback, customer value, learning, empowered teams, all those things are super important. And those enduring principles definitely are still valid and still relevant today.
Yeah. I would agree with you. I would go even a step further. I'm a big advocate for Agile, but kind of in a constructively subversive way. I think the principles of Agile go much further back to their dated origin. I think it's been part of our DNA, and I think it's been part of the paradox. I think the paradox in matrix organization goes much deeper than just, traditional SOPs versus project management. You also have the paradox that you have the yin and the yang in the Agile workspace. And I think you can't be a good manager if you're not comfortable with paradox, and you're not comfortable with knowing when to apply what. And I think the beauty of all of that refers to, processes will never replace agency. Processes will never replace application of intelligence and consciousness and awareness and dedication and being able, to know what matters most. And this brings us back to what the military, taught us with tax lanes. When you're in a difficult situation, do you know what the first principle is, right? And I think that's important. I think one of this is one of my favorite stories I love to tell about executives when it comes to agile thinking. I think it only broke the surface to a certain extent, their understanding of agility. Because, I would say like 95% of the executives that I interact with, if you ask them a question, they go, we need to become more agile. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But my impression is that maybe of those 95 that say we need to be more agile, only 5 to 8% actually know what doing agile is. And that we've got this discussion, what's more important, doing or being. We can deep dive on that. Which brings me to and I'm not discounting their feeling, because I think you need to understand where they're coming from. I think they have a deep sensoric realization that which makes their organization strong also makes it weak sometimes. And the context-based, they have to be flexible. And they have to manage a gamut of different parts of the product life cycle. But what I often hear agile people, so that some of the real hardcore disciples of agile will often, I've actually heard agile disciples say, well, agile is not project management, it's a way of being. I'm like, okay, whatever that means. And they'll often talk about agile organizations. Okay, what the heck is an agile organization if it's not attached to project management? And I think there's a crossover. I think some of the disciplines, there are a crossover to the whole organization. And then I guess some of the constructively subversive question, isn't agile organizations an oxymoron?
It's funny because I used to work in military intelligence.
I know. I thought that would resonate with you. I thought that would resonate with you.
It did. Yeah. So I'll take it step by step. So what is an agile organization? So I would say that an agile organization is one that can adapt at scale without losing coherence. So an agile organization can decide things quickly. They can reallocate resources deliberately when they need to, and they can keep strategy actionable even when conditions around them are changing. So that doesn't mean constrained motion or that there's never hierarchy or everyone does whatever they want either. But it means that the organization can respond without waiting for some big crisis. And is an agile organization an oxymoron? That's great. It can sound like one. I think it can sound like one because organizations create responsibility and stability and control, and agility is a lot more about adaptations. I think that healthy organizations actually need both, and that the real question is what must remain stable so other parts of the organization can adapt safely and quickly. Like agility needs that stable spine. So I don't think it's an oxymoron, but I can see how you might question that.
I was doing the classical volley, but I was setting the ball for you so you could smash it. I agree with you. I think those questions are intended to not just amuse you, but also to amuse and make our viewers think and say, well, what do we actually want? I think one of the questions we need to ask is, what do we want? Do we need both, and what does that mean? Let me from my perspective, I'm a big fan of principle-based leadership, because I think principle-based leadership, like a simple example in the military is leave no one behind.
Sure.
So if you're in a difficult situation, you're in an ambush or something like that, the first thing you're going to look out for is look out for yourself, and you're going to look, take cover and run or return fire. But if you're retreating and you realize that, your overriding principle is that you don't want to be left behind and you're not leaving somebody else behind, it changes and shapes the way you make decisions. And I think principle-based leadership is so important. So for me, for all these different renditions of PMBOK, I sometimes, smile about the alphabet and definition musical chairs we do. We change the names of things, and I don't know what value that adds to besides confusion. But if it makes people happy, I'm good with it. I can learn the new language. But I think the most important thing in any standard is what used to be called foundational concepts. And the foundational concepts were kind of subtly always put in by PMI, and those who knew how to read between the lines, it was there and it was prevalent. And we realized that, tools and processes are nice, but in reality, what makes a good project manager is an understanding of foundational concepts. And what I think the Agile movement did is, like a new generation that evolved out of project management, they said, you know what? Traditional project managers have foundational concepts, but they're not living up to it. I think it was a call to conscience. And they said, you know what? We're going to reiterate them and we're going to double down on some of them, right? So, and for example, some of those principles is co-location.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Or a dedicated team. Mm-hmm. One of the Trojan horses of Agile was inverting the pyramid. All right? Servant leadership is basically an upside down pyramid, right? Instead of the CEO coming and giving you orders, he should be coming in and asking, what can I do to make your life easier? So these are some of these foundational concepts. Another foundational concept that I think some people miss, but I didn't miss it. In traditional project management, the first initial engagement in defining a project was reduced to initiation and planning, right? And Agile said, what the heck are you talking about? Planning never stops. Now, that was a deep understanding in traditional project management, but most traditional projects didn't live it. And I think what the new generation back then, the new generations of Agile is, they called us out on it and said, you know what? This is hogwash. We need to commit to this. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning some of this is that, life doesn't always evolve as you anticipate. Technologies and context change. A lot of what these foundational principles, some of the ones that I've mentioned right now, were solid elements of the foundation of Agile thinking, have gone out the window, for example, because co-location is almost not present at all anymore.
Yeah.
Dedicated teams. I'll often ask, or role commitment. I'll often ask companies, do you work Agile? And they go, of course. And they go, do you have a Scrum Master? And then they start hemming and hawing. Yeah, we have one guy who he got a certification. I said, well, is he dedicated to your team? Nah, he's managing 5 different projects. I'm like, so long-winded foreplay to my actual question. Based on the premises that I believe in foundational concepts of Agile, what is your take on the state of the actual modern state of the way we work? And how is Agile thinking adapting to that? That's kind of a long question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I appreciated your long-winded question there. So I guess it's kind of like most organizations ask teams to be adaptable, but they still keep like all the rigid structures in the organization, like funding, governance, incentives. I see a lot. Decision making is really rigid. And so I think that's where the principles come in. You really need to distinguish the principle from the mechanism. So take co-location, which you mentioned. So yeah, I mean, physical proximity is not really the principle. That's actually pretty dated. I mean, we all work remote since COVID. So we are a lot of us anyways are working in very distributed workplaces. But I think that the underlying principle or need is rapid communication, shared context, trust, knowledge transfer quickly. And I think that need is still very much alive. So our responsibility to preserve the purpose while reconsidering the mechanism is really what I think we should be talking about. Preserve the principle, reconsider the mechanism.
That's a great answer. Question, so PMI is working on all sorts of different levels. It's kind of like plate juggling, those sticks with the plates on it. They've got all sorts of different things going. They've got the PMO, they've got sustainability, they've got discipline Agile. I've had a couple people on for that. But I haven't, and it doesn't mean that PMI is not doing it. This is me setting the ball for you again. Considering that Agile has to go through an evolution as well to stay relevant. So it has to be refreshed and put into the new context of things, which you kind of referred to. What is PMI doing right now on that front?
Sure. Yeah, I can answer that. I'll try to be concise, and you can ask me more questions.
You don't have to be concise. You can be as long-winded as I am.
Well, I mean, some of the things that PMI is doing right now to lead, and I'll say lead in the Agile space, is that there's a couple major themes. The first one is that we're connecting executive strategy with practitioner experience. I think that's really important. So PMI brings a huge global reach and organizational perspective. And we also have a strategic partnership with Agile Alliance. And Agile Alliance has 25 plus years of practitioner depth, and they really understand what real world practices mean. So I think PMI is leading by connecting the executive and the strategy with practitioners and the execution, which is incredibly important. So there's a big opportunity to connect executive ambition with practitioner reality. So that's definitely one of the big, spaces or themes in which we're working. The other is all related to, going back to software development, especially in the age of AI disruption. So I know you've been talking about AI a lot, but I mean, software development is one of the things that has changed the most because of AI, and that's also where Agile started. So I actually think AI and Agile are very complementary, and PMI is very committed to helping software developers figure out what that means and figure out what are the modern best practices, how can AI and Agile coexist, what does it mean for all of these people in Agile roles. So yeah, those are the two big themes I would say that PMI and Agile Alliance are working on right now.
So that means you've also contributed to the CPMAI?
Yeah, so I work really closely with Kathleen. Of course,
she's the one who introduced us. Thanks to Kathleen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what she would say is that, if you're managing AI projects or if you're trying to, embrace an AI transformation, then you need to be very agile in your approach. You need to learn, you need to adapt. You need fast feedback loops. So you'll see Agile infused throughout CPMAI for sure.
Now, for those of us who are more detail focused in the development of the PMBOK guide and stuff like that, we see the evolution and the inclusion of Agile. There was this very short, small book, I have it here somewhere, on Agile. PMI has brought out a lot of new literature, practice guides, and standards on different things. Is there a new standard for Agile, or is that covered by the PMBOK?
So we do. So we have the PMBOK. We also have the Agile Practice Guide, which actually was just released. A new version was just released a couple weeks ago. So I would say check out the Agile Practice Guide. And then I would say the PMI ACP is definitely the training and the material that is focused the most on Agile. Of course, the PMP also has a lot of agility infused throughout that as well. But I think that the ACP is very, very relevant because it was never built around a single framework, or it's not about a certain methodology. Even from the very beginning, it was recognized that, successful practitioners need to understand all kinds of different approaches, and they need to apply them in their context. So it's definitely not a plug and play. And I think that that's becoming more and more important today, because I think actually the industry is moving away from frameworks and methodology wars and that kind of thing. It doesn't matter if you're Scrum or Kanban or hybrid, it depends on how you deliver value in an increasingly complex and uncertain environment. So I think that PMI's research, our standards, our certifications really show that, and it shows that successful projects are those that deliver value that's worth the effort and worth the expense. And those things require agility, and they require judgment, adaptability, business understanding. We have a lot of materials at PMI and Agile Alliance for agility. The ACP is the one that goes the deepest and can give you the most.
I'm an ACP myself. It was the certification one of the certifications I enjoyed most. And I think it's far one of the most superior Agile certifications out there. The only thing that what's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, and we're always looking at ways to improve and update it. So in 27, you'll see us doing a lot more research right now so that in 27 we can update the ACP to be even more relevant with those two themes that I talked to you about, enterprise agility and software development in an AI disrupted world. So always gathering information from the community and always updating our materials to be the most relevant and applicable for our members today.
So just as a point of reference, this is the old one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
A little thin. Is the new one a little bit thicker?
I don't know if it's probably a little bit thicker.
Okay.
I'm not
and then
sure
the other question is,
together.
I don't think this is a PMI product, is it?
Yeah, well, we do have a lot of ACP materials. Yeah, I see that you've tabbed it. I love it. You're so studious.
No, the reason I mention this is, I have a marketing and a product manager background, and I'm always interested. How are we? If I see something that I think is valuable, and that's why I'm happy to have you on, and also platform the ACP. I'm not saying this because I'm getting paid for it or anything, but I think the PMI ACP is the certification to have in Agile. I think because it gives you a good overview of everything, and it resonated with me. I also noticed that if you look at some of the other Agile organizations, there's kind of been an influx of certification levels. If you look at the number of certifications out there, you go cross-eyed. The certifications that PMI still upholds for Agile would be the ACP. What's your relationship to Discipline Agile? Is there a cooperation there as well, or are those two different camps that just work parallel to one another?
Yeah, no, PMI, Agile Alliance, and Discipline Agile definitely all connect. I mean, basically, we have a common goal, which is we want to help professionals and organizations deliver value and adapt to change. So there's a lot of common threads in there, and I think that definitely a lot of practical guidance, professional development, and I would say fit for purpose thinking is what Disciplined Agile is really about. We are still curating all of the Disciplined Agile material. And in fact, like right now, I'm in the middle of looking at all of the websites. There's all Disciplined Agile is like a set of websites right now, and we're moving that content into an easier to consume interactive PDF that I think people will really like. It's going to be kind of like the PMBOK. We're planning that at the end of this year. But I also know that we're updating some of the materials as well. Again, like those same two themes that I talked to you about, like years ago when we created Disciplined Agile, we weren't necessarily thinking about AI and software development or all of the newer concepts around enterprise agility. So Disciplined Agile is still very relevant. It's part of the suite of products that PMI offers. And we, together with Agile Alliance, are updating all of the material for ACP and Disciplined Agile to reflect those things.
Yeah. Okay. We started off with a question: Is Agile still relevant? I want to take that question a step further for executives who are saying, you know what, we've been kind of riding that horse for a while, and I don't see a difference, because that's usually they don't see the difference. It's not that there isn't a difference; they just don't see it, or maybe they're not on that tactical or operational level. What would be recommendations that you would give to executives to keep the faith and stay the course for Agile thinking?
Yeah, I would say right now in the world that we live in, we're kind of all dealing with what I'll call polycrisis, which is there's AI disruption, there's climate change problems, there are wars, like there are tariffs. There's so many things that organizations are having to deal with right now that I think agility and adaptability is becoming even more important. So I would recommend that leaders don't get caught up in the specific, the specific ways that you can implement Agile, like Scrum or Kanban, like the methodologies or frameworks that we talked about. But I would say that they really need to make sure that their organizations can adapt and still maintain coherence or still deliver on their strategy. So maybe don't worry about the words about, the keywords or the things that zealots might say in the past about agility, but know that it's still incredibly important to make sure that we're always headed in the right direction. We have our strategy and the outcomes we're trying to achieve in mind, but also we can be adaptable as we learn more. We don't want to be super rigid. We don't want to lose coherence and become chaotic. So yeah, agility requires both, and we definitely need agility in organizations today. It just might not look like what it used to 20 years ago.
Yeah. I'll take that one step further. If we're going to keep it simplistic, you can more or less reduce an organization. You can reduce it to more than that, but I'm going to keep it simple to a strategic, a tactical, and an operational level. You might say that the tactical level is more functional. One of the things I continually preach to companies that I do work for is, if you understand the promise of agility and you want agility, it's a 3-tier approach. So you can't just be agile on an operational level. And sure. I think the misunderstanding of agile was, I think the original organizational chart for agile was this, this hard circle, and there was a product owner, a scrum master, and the scrum team, and beyond that, everybody was like a barbarian. And the first question was, where's the sponsor? And people go, oh, we don't have sponsors. They changed that eventually. Once again, summary, for Agile to work, if Agile is more than just project management and it's something that benefits an organization as a whole, it needs to include the strategic, the tactical, and operational level. What advice would you give to an executive to make sure that they have the institutional infrastructure that works?
Yeah. So I would say there's a few things that come to mind. Like, I'll start with the infrastructure that you mentioned. I call it organizational design, but I think we're saying the same thing. So there's like 3 main principles that I would keep in mind if you want to organize or design your company to be very agile. I would say one is you still need governance. So back to your clear principles and boundaries, you need governance, but not gatekeepers. So you want to have an effective decision making. So organize your company in a way that you can govern with clear guardrails, but not be gatekeepers. The second thing, I think, if I'm really reflecting on org design, is it's about funding. So funding purpose and intent, not execution activity. So we really want to realize value, and that all depends on if our investment is actually aligned to strategic intent and the outcomes or strategy that we've been talking about. And then that also enables learning and adaptation as those priorities evolve. So govern with clear guardrails, fund purpose and intent, not necessarily all the execution activity. And then the third one that I think is really critical is designing for adaptability. So actually, you need an operating model. Like it can be unique to your organization for sure, but it needs to be designed in a way that it allows for adaptability, and it allows your company to respond to change without breaking down. Because if not, you can just become very, very fragile. So that's what I would say on org design. And then you kind of mentioned a couple other things, leadership and execution, I think. So that's great. Leadership is all about creating clarity and purpose and aligning the company on whatever your outcomes are, the things that you're trying to do. So I think leaders can specifically adjust their behavior to make sure that they're creating that clarity of purpose and aligning the organization on those outcomes. Because CEOs and executives often think they're doing that. And then when you talk to practitioners, it's not actually as clear as what we might think. So that, and maybe just embracing technology and also distributed talent. So we talked about just, distributed teams before, and of course, AI, technology, data, all of those things are super core to how companies create value, how they make decisions, how they compete in such a crazy, fast-changing environment. And then just to wrap it up with that execution level that you talked about, where possible, I would say that we need to move the decision making down to where the value is created. This is an age-old value, kind of principle from Agile. And I still think it's true today, because decision speed and effectiveness really increase when that authority is closer to the teams doing the work, where they actually are closest to the customer, closest to the data, or whatever the real work is. And then, of course, deliver frequently. You can always learn. You can adapt if you are delivering constantly rather than having a big plan up front. And making all of that work visible actually really, really helps. So yeah, I think you're right to look at it in those different lenses of kind of leadership or leadership behaviors, maybe, then how you're designing your organization, and then how do teams actually execute the work. I love the way you framed that.
Do we need a PMO to be able to be agile?
Not necessarily, but I do think that PMOs can definitely help with enterprise agility. They can execute a lot of this. Of course, I work at PMI now and also Agile Alliance, and I partner with people who run PMOs all the time, and I actually see them as a big partner. And in fact, the last company I worked at for 5 years, we had an Agile team and a PMO, and it was a little difficult at first, but over the years and as time passed and we really figured out what does agility mean for that particular organization, we were actually super close. Like, it was almost one big team. Like, the PMO absolutely helped the organization become agile, and we worked together on that for sure. So I think it can be an enabler if done well. It can be a major enabler for especially enterprise agility.
Is portfolio management and program management relevant for agile thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest lessons learned I had, even at that company, is that you need portfolio management in order to make all the work visible. And by that, I mean literally all of the work that people are doing at that highest level. What are the top priorities? Which things are going to bring the most value to the organization? Which programs, projects, effort are the things that we want our company and our workers to focus on to meet our outcomes? And also, specifically, what are we not working on? And we need to have those discussions in a really strategic and, I'll say, organized way. And that's why I think Agile portfolio management brings to the table. So yeah, that helped me so much in other organizations that I've worked with. I think it's actually critical.
The role of product owner, sponsor, and steering committee relevant to Agile, being Agile?
I think that you can decide what your operating model is. I do think that it's important to have a person like a product owner who can make some of those critical decisions around what is important, what should we be working on, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and adjusting that backlog, if you will, constantly. So yeah, I think it's absolutely still relevant today. Same with sponsors. You really need their perspective. You need to make sure you understand what are they hoping to get out of it. Perception is a big part of success for any project. And I think working very closely with sponsors in an agile way can certainly increase project success.
When a lot of my companies that were shifting towards hybrid or agile came to me and were asking me, can you give me a 7-year-old's explanation of what a product owner is? And I this was the explanation I gave to them. I said, well, it comes from product manager. And one of the challenges of classical project management is that mostly project managers were not people who were dedicated to the product they were working on, but came in from the side. They were dedicated to the project, but they lacked the background information, the in-depth understanding of the product lifecycle to understand their role in it. And then the second problem with traditional project management is that neither the project manager nor the sponsor were highly knowledgeable about the thing they were working on, right? So the concept of a product owner is basically taking the product manager and saying, listen, we're going to involve you in the project. So one of the premier benefits of a product owner is, in the PMBOK, it refers to scope being split into two: technical scope and project management scope, right? A traditional project manager is good at project management scope, everything that's in the process guide and in a PMBOK, but they're not necessarily a technical expert. It helps if it's a smaller project and they learn if it's a bigger project, but they're not the foremost authority on technical expertise. The benefit of a product owner being a technical project manager is that he can relieve the sponsor of a lot of the decisions that a sponsor is not capable of doing it because it's on a tactical level and they think on a strategic level. Would you agree with that summary, or do you have a different take on that?
I think I agree with some parts of it for sure. So what I would say is that it's great if project managers and product owners, really anybody on the project leadership team, understands the work. So I think that the best leaders, I'll just say leaders instead of any of those specific roles, I think the best leaders start with the problem and they start with the desired outcomes and they understand the constraints and the risks and they get the required feedback. So they're working with the experts, they're working with the people on the team to make sure that they understand what is the challenge, what are they trying to get, what are they trying to achieve? And it's not really about like, what's the preferred framework. So the method matters, but the ability to choose and adapt the method, I think matters more. And I think it is definitely helpful if the leaders understand technically what they're working on. But that doesn't mean that they need to be the sole technical expert. You can be a great project manager or product manager and just you have the technical experts around you to help guide as you learn.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you a phenomenon I've come across, which I thought was amusing. Some of the clients that I work with who started working on an agile methodology endorsed now the product owner, scrum master, although I don't think they really understood what a scrum master was, and a scrum team. And they did that for a while, and then they they changed a little bit and said, you know what, the product owner doesn't feel responsible enough for us. The scrum master doesn't have authority enough. So what they started doing is they started taking, as a third person, a project manager back in the team. Have you had that experience with your?
Yeah, like I said, I've had a lot of experiences at companies where it is very much a hybrid or a fit for purpose approach. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the industry is headed. Not specifically that there's those three people. It includes a project manager, scrum master, and product owner. That's one approach that can work. But I think, again, it's thinking about what are the problems you're actually trying to solve? What's the context of your organization? What's the culture like? How important is risk? Like how much rigor and discipline do you need on whatever it is that you're doing? And then as long as you're very, very clear and as long as you communicate that approach to your team, I think it can work. So fit for purpose or, the right roles for your specific organization. Mm-hmm. I think it can work in a lot of different ways. But the most important is what's your context and communicate it very, very well.
I sense that you're being somewhat diplomatic and open, which I appreciate because I understand where you're coming from. But I think for people who take one step back, I think the requirement to have that level of agile understanding that you are talking about, the person needs to have a profounder and deeper understanding of different frameworks. I think one of the things that agile people, especially disciplined agile, likes to do often is kind of elude choose your way of working, and it irritates me a little because I'm like, you know what, I'm having a hard enough time getting these people to work in a serious fashion. And I'm going to take one step. We had this conversation when we first met. I think what a lot of people don't realize is for every certified project manager, I think there's like 1.7 million already out there. There are another 10 million who do project management, who've never heard of a standard, who are not familiar with any organization, who don't have a certification and still do project management. And I think if you look at maturity models, the beginning level that I think we all began at before we formally understood that project management can also be seen as a discipline, okay, was what I love to call anarchic agility, which is a euphemism for doing it any which way. And the only issue I have with this discipline agile and agile thing, hey, don't get so stuck on the framework or the process or the methods or the titles, is as a consultant who's often focused on efficiency and common language and common process so that we can make forward process, it sounds a little bit like a carte blanche for whatever we do is okay. And that's in my opinion, is not the answer. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I actually really agree with your warning about anarchic agility. To me, I don't usually say that term. I usually say it's not chaos. You can't just do whatever you want. Fit for purpose does not mean everybody can choose the way that they work, and it can be different across the organization. And like I said a couple of minutes ago, I really believe that every organization needs an operating model. You need common priorities. You need to know who has the decision rights, who's accountable for what. And I think something you said is also really important, which is that shared language. But what I don't think it means is that you have to pick up an operating model or a framework.
You have to be dogmatic. You don't have to be dogmatic, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes. So you need an operating model. You need a shared language. All of those things are important. You need a frame or governance in which people can work in, and you have to clearly articulate that. That's, I think, the thing that people think is not true about Agile, and it is. So yeah, fit for purpose doesn't mean free for all. It's not the same thing. Yeah. But teams need autonomy within boundaries, for example. I think you're right. We're not talking about anarchy or chaos or do whatever you want. That's not true. It's just that
I wanted to stress that, because some people might interpret that, and what I would go a step further. To be able to do that level of adaptive application for a project requires a deeper understanding of what the different frameworks are, so that you can select what suits your purpose.
That is a fair point. Like, I come from a place where I understand many of the frameworks and methodologies. I've been doing this for a very long time. Yeah. So I agree. Like, when I go into an organization and I say, like, what problems are you trying to solve? What outcomes are you trying to achieve? What is your organization currently like? Then I can select things from different, ways of working that makes sense. So maybe Kanban makes sense for certain teams, or maybe there's still a need for Scrum in some other areas. I think it's good to understand the options, just as it's also important to understand project management discipline and approaches. Then once you have that overarching understanding, you can select the things that make the most sense for your company, and then make that very clear in your kind of tailored or customized operating model.
Let's talk about the manifesto a little bit. First, feedback to the manifesto: it needs to be reformulated into non-IT language, because I think Agile is relevant also to non-IT projects. I've already reformulated it for myself. I never use the IT language. The other thing is there's a couple contentious term statements in the manifesto, but that's intended to get people's attention. And I think the biggest danger of the manifesto is that people say, I'm going to sacrifice the right for the left. And that's not what it's saying. It means the paradox of balancing between it. One of the, I think, most difficult statements in the Agile Manifesto, besides the documentation issue, which is relevant also in Agile projects, is the concept that making the client happy, I'm going to rephrase it, paraphrase it a little bit, making the client happy is more important than insisting on a signed contract. A lot of my clients cringe.
Yeah. Well, I told you I came from a very rigorous background. Like, I came from Department of Defense, or now Department of War. Like, you have contracts. Like, you have to negotiate your contract. That is important. It's just that customer collaboration is more important. So even in those places where we had very, very stringent rules around the contract, not only the contract, but the execution of the contract, we were still able to achieve pretty high levels of agility by working with the customer, by working with the sponsors and all the other stakeholders in a really collaborative, agile way. So yes, we had a contract, but we also started rewriting some of our contracts to be more agile and outcome focused. So for example, we could submit a plan at a high level and yet have the ability or authorization to change the thing, like the little things in the execution. Yeah. So I still believe that is a valid principle. I think it should be a guiding principle. Contracts are necessary, but it's more important to collaborate, is my takeaway.
I'm going to go back to my statement beforehand. Agility is a team sport and requires all parties to think and be agile. And one of the guiding understandings of Agile, I think everybody endorses the concept of minimal viable product, which is an evolution of the Pareto principle. But I like the concept of minimal viable product, although you'll have people who argue which cartoon is correct to show MVP. My question to you is, I think one of the manifesto statements is it's more important to adapt to what the client wants than sticking to the plan, which is another contentious or difficult one for people to really truly understand. In particular, if I think of big SaaS projects, these big IT projects where we're talking about several millions that flow into it, and these are partly very complex and sometimes existential endeavors. That can really create a lot of upheaval, both for the vendor and for the client. How important is the concept of MVP? And what I saw, there was also an effort. I think that effort has been extended as far as I've known. I'm looking forward to catch up to it. The PMBOK originally focused on some of the classical contracts, and I saw that I think one of the documents that PMI brought out focused on that we can also rethink classical projects and tailor them to be more agile. What's your take on MVP and agile, more agilely conducive contracts?
Yeah, I mean, MVP is really important because it's like, basically, the whole premise is that you need to get feedback very quickly. You don't want to build the wrong thing, even on these huge SaaS projects or billion-dollar things that we're working on. Where it makes sense, you want to be able to provide whatever your product is to your customers, even if it's not fully working, even if it's not complete, so that you can get early feedback. And also so that your customers also might have a higher rate of adoption because they feel like they've been part of it, they've influenced it, and so that you don't end up at the end of this year or 2 or 5 years or whatever it is with something that isn't usable or isn't desired from your customers. So I think that MVP is still very important. I think that that's certainly one of the core principles or themes in agility that should persevere and is still relevant. And I also think the whole thing about responding to change over following a plan is important. Like, yes, have a plan, but have a high-level plan that also allows for some adaptability. As you're learning and getting this feedback from your customers, or as you're demoing or showing your MVP, you want to be able to incorporate that. It can't be such a rigid plan that you just can't change. Otherwise, you're heading down a road you might not want to head down. So.
Okay, and are you working on or expanding on some of these agile contracts?
So at PMI, I'm not working on that currently, but I have in the past. So like I said,
I think there's some in place already.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, this is not a new concept. Like, that's not something I'm building out for PMI at the moment, but I definitely agree that you can have agile contracts. It's something that I worked on a lot in the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, in organizations where they absolutely had big contractual requirements, but they also wanted to be adaptable. So yeah, there's certainly ways to write contracts that are more agile or allow organizations to be more adaptable. And I think they're better. Like, if it's possible to get a more agile contract, I think go for it. And I could definitely share a lot more on that topic.
Okay. You kind of mentioned larger projects, and then we come to the classical agile also principle that theoretically in the olden days, agile teams were never larger than 7 plus or minus 2. I think the size of a Roman squad, or actually a U.S. Army squad as well. I think that's an eternal number that keeps popping up.
Sure.
But that doesn't work for larger projects. So the question is, there's been a number of scaled initiatives, less and safe being, I think, the two most dominant ones that are out there. I think Discipline Agile deals with a little bit. Is that a topic that you're covering under your helm as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I would say that this is one of those things, kind of like co-location, that may be evolving a lot right now.
Okay.
And that is because if you think about agile teams right now, and if you really think about it in a modern delivery, especially with AI, sometimes teams are less people and more agents. Like, it's actually becoming a very, very different team dynamic or, organization, I guess. So I would say that, yeah, it's nice if you can do the, feed your team with 2 pizzas or whatever. And that's because the communication pathways are less. Like, that's the reason, is that if you have more people, it's harder to communicate. But I think that that's evolving a lot today because, like I said, AI, I mean, there's agents on our teams now. And so you can have a lot of agents doing work for you, and then you need someone with that judgment and with those decision rights. So I think the way that agile teams look today, or the way that they're orchestrated is very, very different. I think that having small collaborative groups is very helpful. I think that making sure that the communication pathways are there and that you don't end up with a lot of chaotic communication is still critical. But maybe that's evolving a little bit right now.
Yeah, but does PMI have its own model for scaled agile?
Yeah, so we specifically do not have a model or framework. Like I said, we're framework agnostic. We think it's important to have an organizational design and to have an operating model, but we're not saying you need to do SAFe or Scrum at Scale or whatever the thing is. It's just more of what we talked about before, like define the problem you're trying to solve, understand your organization, select the things intelligently that make sense from these frameworks, and then scale. And if you allow me one little tangent, I'll say that that's kind of what enterprise agility is talking about. So, if you think about it from like an athlete perspective, let's talk about soccer since we just had the World Cup. So, of course, like Messi or one of the best athletes on the field is super agile. Like he's able to make decisions, pivot during the game, and that's critical, individual agility. Then we have team level agility, which is really what we've been talking about for 25 years and what a lot of the scaling frameworks are talking about. We need lots of agile teams that can work together, that are coordinated. So for example, if we're talking about soccer, on the team, like me and you are players, so we need to understand what's happening on the field. We need to adapt, and that's true with any kind of teams in corporations as well, agile teams. But if you don't actually look at the whole stadium, and you just have a whole bunch of agile teams, you're going to miss a lot. Like, for example, if you zoom out and look at making the whole enterprise agile or the stadium agile, then you're talking about things like marketing, security, food and beverage.
There's a bigger picture.
There's a huge, bigger picture. So I think it's important to not only scale agile teams, but look at the whole stadium or look at that enterprise agility. And like I said, I'm not prescribing a specific framework for that. But I don't think it's about prescribing. I think it's about providing and I think that's what PMI has always been good at, is creating a one-stop shop for understanding the basic principle of what scaled agile would be and what potential models would be, so that I don't have to go shopping around to figure out, do I need SAFe or less now, and do I need to get certified, and do I need to pay a consultant a lot of money to do it, or can I just... Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, which is why the ACP is framework agnostic, but touches on many of these different approaches.
And I think that although I don't think the ACP covers less and SAFe, does it?
It doesn't call it out specifically, like it doesn't talk about the SAFe framework, but it shows you many different approaches that are possible implementation.
No, it's when it comes to that, it's sensational. It was a big eye opener for me. I thought it was a great help. I was going to share with you a weird example. I think one of the preconceptions amongst IT-focused companies is that if you're in IT, you have to work agile, which always makes me smile. Okay, because I know, and I won't mention the company, I know a very large SaaS provider who provides a portfolio of different SaaS products, but has delivered each one at least 10,000 times.
Okay.
So, in reality, an absolutely predictive project. Okay, they literally know every step. They even have a framework that they provide their clients for free that they can use. And a lot of I have this, I love their employees. They're wonderful employees. And I'll often have this conversation with them, before we make a coffee break. And I'll point this out. I said, yeah, you guys, is this your experience that your client wants you to be agile, but in reality it's a predictive project? They go, yeah. And I go, well, how do we solve that? I said, just use agile language.
That's funny. Well, I think there's a use case for both. Like I said, I am not saying that.
Well, I think it's a question of hybrid as well. I think sometimes sometimes the hype overcomes us, and then we forget to rationalize, well, what am I using it for? If I'm in a classical situation where I'm developing the software, and it's uncertain, and there's a high level of unknowns, of course you're going to work agile.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that in a predictive project you can't. By the way, I don't believe in one or the other. I always use hybrid one way or the other. I think it's the percentage of how much you use. We had this conversation in the pre-conversation. I'm going to bring it up here as well. One of the big trigger statements that I always hear, and I usually hear it from rabid agilists, is the statement: "It's more important to be agile than to do agile." What's your take on that?
I think you need both. I think it's weird that people say it's one or the other.
Yeah.
I think that it is really important to be agile. In other words, be able to make those decisions quickly and adapt and not just say you want agility. But I also think that you actually have to kind of do agile as well. Like there are some practices, there are some things that if you're...
Whatever way of working, you got to have one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. My statement to those people is you're not a marathon runner when you buy the shoes. You're a marathon runner when you do the kilometers or the miles. So it's the doing is equally important.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe it goes back to the principle thing again. Like it's like preserve the principles. That's the be agile part. Make sure you're embracing those. But also there is a mechanism. So what is the mechanism? And maybe that's the doing part.
What are some of the highlights we can look forward to from PMI when it comes to agility?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of amazing things right now. I mentioned 2 different tracks, and so you'll see a lot of things in those spaces. So certainly enterprise agility. If you haven't seen the Manifesto for Enterprise Agility, I would definitely check that out. It's fairly new. It came out
for those who are listening who hear about it for the first time. Tell us what that is, real quick.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the Manifesto for Enterprise Agility is a document that PMI developed in partnership with a lot of CEOs, as well as other executives and practitioners. We did a lot of research to understand what is enterprise agility, why do we need it? It's a short document that basically describes that enterprise agility is the capacity to adapt at scale without losing coherence. So to decide quickly, redirect resources deliberately, and also keep strategy actionable under real world pressure. And it just kind of discusses the values of enterprise agility. There are some principles, 9 principles in the document. And yeah, it should guide companies towards enterprise agility. So that's one thing that we're very excited about. Mm-hmm. And then we also have a follow-on report that we actually just released a week or 2 ago, which is called Closing the Change Readiness Gap. And this is where I'm focused on a lot of work right now and basically trying to understand what gets lost between strategy and execution. So that report, both of those are actually free and you can download them on the PMI site. So I would take a look at that, and that's a lot of the research, a lot of the work that we're doing this year for sure.
I'm actually trying to pull it up on my internet. I think the Zoom is taking up my capacity. So those are both documents that we can look forward to on the PMI website. If you're a member, you can download it those are papers, right?
Yeah, they're free. You can download them. Anybody can sign up, even just for a free account. You can look at the Manifesto for Enterprise Agility.
We'll put a link in the underneath on YouTube. Go ahead.
I said that'd be great. Thank you.
That's kind of our segue into the topic of agility or transformation. I think the only thing that manages to eke out any oxygen besides AI is the word transformation, and I think there's a reason for it because the topic of transformation is just another word for the word change management. I don't care what anybody else would try to convince me of. I don't really care what you call the damn thing. For me, what's important is if you do it. I don't care if you call it change, whether you do DMOC, whether you're doing Six Sigma, whether you're doing lean, whether you call it a hop on board. I don't care what you call it. The question is, and I'm not dogmatic, but I always understand you need foundational concepts, but you also need a framework. I don't care what framework it is, but you need to understand frameworks to be able to choose. One thing I often say about transformation or change is that it's the twin sister or brother of project management. And that includes both agile or hybrid or traditional. Mm-hmm. There's a symbiotic relationship between the two that is often overlooked. I know that PMI has a fairly strong dedication to lean as an additional concept to project management. What's your take and strategy in including that sentiment, that concept of transformation and agility? Because I think there's also a very strong I think probably even a greater symbiotic relationship between agile and transformation as between traditional. Because I think every transformation is so utterly dynamic, it requires more agility than it does predictive.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely agree. I actually think that project management delivers solutions and change management helps people adopt and use them. And you need both. I think it's really critical to have both. I think that a project is really only successful when people create value from the outcome. Like they have to actually use and adopt the thing that you're building. So delivery is not complete just because the solution exists. That's not the end. It's complete when people can actually use it and they're using the solution to create value. So that's why we're talking about the change readiness gap so much. Like it's actually integral to project management, agility, change management. They all go together for sure. And also organizations, it's like we approve one initiative at a time, but people experience it all at once. And so change management is really critical. A lot of times leaders believe that they've created the vision and the priorities and the conditions for everyone to kind of respond to this change. But then the people closest to the work often experience something really different. They might be experiencing uncertainty or friction or like all the competing priorities that are happening. So the distance between those two realities is exactly what we're calling the change readiness gap. So you need the organizational, aspiration to adapt, and then its actual ability to realign people. That's the critical piece. So I think that you really do need all three. They're very much connected. And Agile plays a huge role in change. It creates those shorter feedback loops. It creates the stakeholder or sponsor interaction and alignment that we talked about earlier. It allows people to learn. Change efforts fail when change is treated as like a one-time thing versus a continuous learning process.
Yeah. My father was in international hotel business and worked for a multinational company, was based in the United States, but he worked internationally. And he used to always say that he learned the art of hotel management in Europe, and he learned the business of hotel management in the United States. He used to work in New York. And this is kind of the lead-in to a question when it comes to transformation. Kind of bridging Europe and the U.S., I'm kind of a in between those two cultures. I endorse many things I've learned in Europe, and I endorse other things very strongly that I learned in the United States. And if you look at transformation and agility to transformation in Europe, I find that most of the consultants that support change will focus on systemic thinking, which is a rabbit hole that you can get high on and get lost. I mean, there's so many. It's really like an ayahuasca trip, or I don't know what they're doing, but it gets really deep and profound. And I'm like, all this philosophy, great, but what does it mean pragmatically? What the valuable part is they have a deep understanding of psychology and how the systemic and the psychology works. And then there's another part of it, which is very popular here, which is called constellation psychology, where the lineup and the proximity of people has an impact, which is wonderful and very enriching. And I find on the opposite side of the Atlantic, you have the American process, which is more like, shut up, what's the framework, what's the process, what's the tool, right? Are we doing Gemba? Are we doing Lean? Are we, and I find that very refreshing because it's pragmatic and it's easy to learn. It's not maybe easy to do, but it's easy to learn. What's your take? What's the PMI direction as far as closing the change readiness gap? Is PMI addressing both factors or focusing more on the framework?
Well, just going back to your international comments, I mean, I guess I just want to say one thing about that, which is that, my own international experience, which is a lot.
Which would be a follow-up question, but go ahead and answer that one first. What impact did your international exposure have on you?
Okay, sure. I'll answer that. So, well, it made me a little more cautious about plug and play one framework everywhere. I
Mm-hmm.
will say that. Like that's why I feel so, so excited about that is because I don't think that there's one universally correct operating model, and I
There's
think
many
that
ways to do it. Yeah.
yeah, I think the principles and the practices, the principles travel well. The practices might change depending
Yeah.
on where you're at, depending on the culture, the religion, the regulation, the maturity, all these things. There's just like a lot of
Preference.
factors
Those are preference. Yeah.
and preference too. So yeah, definitely wanted to share that. And then your other question, maybe you
Well,
could
my
repeat.
question was, if we're looking at change, I think my experience in Europe, it's more the psychological and emotional factor. People always want to talk about the Valley of Tears, whereas in America, they're like, it's not that they don't care about the Valley of Tears, but it's more like what's step one, what's step two, what are the tools that are at my disposal. Is PMI adhering to both?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would say that it is definitely very emotional. You do need to worry about the Valley of Tears at least a little bit. Like you definitely have to understand where people are coming from and all of that. So I would say it's both. We also need practices. We also need process. We also need deliberate change management. As we talked about before, it's so important that change management is part of everything that we're doing. So absolutely both. I mean, that's a pretty easy one.
Yeah. Okay. What engagements do you have upcoming? Where can one see you live? What other things can you tell us that we might be able to look out for from your camp?
Yeah, that's great. Well, we just finished the PMI Agile 2026 conference last week. So definitely if you missed it, like check out the highlights. There were a lot of amazing talks. I was there and doing all sorts of things. Going forward, of course, PMI has a lot of conferences across the world. So speaking of international, we have the Global Summit series. We have one in Detroit coming soon this fall. So I'll be there and talking a lot about many of the things that we've discussed today. So follow me on LinkedIn, and I'm all over the place these days. But definitely the PMI Global Summit series is what I would say to check out right now.
Yeah. Okay. Denise, it's been a blast. Short and to the point.
Thank you.
Any questions you have for me?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we've covered most of it. So.
Good. Denise, thanks so much for your time. And to our listeners, I hope you've got plenty of valuable information. I think we've provided you plenty of it. Make sure to reach out to Denise on LinkedIn and make sure to download what you can from PMI. Denise, thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks. Take care.